Welcome to the deep dive. We've got our sources ready, and we're here to cut through the noise and pull out the key knowledge for you.
Yeah, today's topic is a big one. The Federal Reserve.
Hmm.
Hugely powerful, often kind of mysterious, right?
Totally. And it has this massive impact on the economy, on your life, really. The sources we have give a pretty unique look inside.
They really do. Digging into the history, the decisions, why they mattered.
So our mission for this deep dive, unpack the core insights. What's the Fed's job supposed to be? What did it do in the past? The big moments.
And what does it all mean looking forward? We want to make it make sense without drowning in jargon.
Definitely. And the source material starts strong, doesn't it? Calls the US dollar the world's greatest monetary brand.
But then immediately asks, well, what's its future if it's based solely upon faith? That's a hook.
It really is. Okay, let's start unpacking. Before faith, what's the Fed supposed to do? What's its core role, according to these sources?
Right, so the basics. The sources say its main jobs are controlling the money supply, setting key interest rates, regulating banks.
And keeping the whole system stable, basically.
Exactly, trying to prevent financial chaos. The Guardian, sort of.
But like you said, it often feels like a black box to people. The sources mention this perception, maybe that the Fed just, prints money.
Yeah, and that's a key clarification in the material. They aren't printing tax money for the government to spend. It's described as monetary policy.
Okay.
Using, essentially, an electronic printing press. Creating money within the banking system, electronically.
That makes sense. Big difference. And the sources use a really good analogy for how interest rates work, right? It's not just abstract.
Yeah, the gas pedal versus brake one. It's pretty clear.
Explain that.
So lowering rates is like hitting the gas pedal. Makes borrowing cheaper, encourages spending, gets the economy moving faster.
Stimulus.
Right. And raising rates. That's the brake. Makes borrowing more expensive, slows spending down, cools off inflation if it's getting too high. Got it. Gas and brake. And originally, back in 1913, the sources say its purpose was much narrower.
Much narrower. Mainly providing emergency cash liquidity during bank panics. A lender of last resort. That was the initial idea.
Its role grew a lot. And the sources say that led to some pretty big mistakes early on.
Oh, yeah. Significant learning curves. The sources are quite direct about the Fed's role in worsening the Great Depression.
How so? What did they actually do wrong, according to the material?
Well, first, they kept rates too low in the mid-20s, which helped fuel bubbles, stocks, debt.
Okay.
Then, after the '29 crash, they actually raised rates pretty aggressively. Bad timing.
Really bad timing.
But the killer, the sources really emphasized this, was what they didn't do next. As banks started failing, they did nothing.
Nothing, while the system was collapsing.
Basically, yeah. The sources say they were trying to defend the gold standard, which meant keeping money tight, not injecting cash. So they let the money supply just crater as banks failed.
It's stark. The material even quotes former chair Ben Bernanke saying, "We did it. We caused the Great Depression." A huge admission.
A very painful lesson about inaction. Okay, so depression, lesson one. Then there's the great inflation in the 60s and 70s. What's the story there?
Well, the sources link it partly to big government spending, Vietnam, Great Society programs, putting upward pressure on prices.
Inflationary pressure.
Right. And the Fed chairman then, Bill Martin, apparently knew he should raise rates, hit the brake.
But politics got in the way.
That's what the sources suggest. He reportedly caved in to pressure from President Johnson, who didn't want higher rates slowing things down.
And the result of not breaking.
Inflation spiraled. The sources call it a disaster. By '71, the U.S. couldn't back the dollar with gold anymore. Nixon cut the cord.
So the dollar became purely a paper currency, based purely on...
Backed only by faith. Faith in the government and the Fed to manage it, but inflation just kept roaring.
Prices doubled in a decade.
More than doubled, yeah. The sources paint a picture of a total mess by the late 70s. Which brings us to Paul Volcker.
The inflation slayer.
That's his reputation. The sources really highlight his actions under President Carter. He knew it would hurt, cause a recession.
But he did it anyway.
He did. Jacked up interest rates like crazy. The sources mentioned they hit 21%.
21! Can you even imagine? That must have slammed the economy.
Oh, it did. Deep recession in the early 80s. And this is the key point from the sources it worked. It broke the back of inflation and restored faith in the dollar and in our central bank.
Because they showed they could make the tough calls.
Exactly. The kind of painful, unpopular choice politicians probably wouldn't make on their own, the sources imply.
Okay, so lessons learned. Inaction bad, hesitation bad. Which leads into the next phase, the Great Moderation, mid-'80s to 2007 or so.
Yeah, generally seen as calmer times, lower inflation, milder recessions. The Fed looked like it was on top of things.
And the main guy then was Alan Greenspan. The sources mention that irony, right? Free market guy becomes the chief price fixer of money.
It's a good point they make. And his first big test was the '87 crash.
What did he do?
Quick response. Cut rates fast, pumped in liquidity, prevented a meltdown.
But the sources say that set a dangerous precedent. Why dangerous?
Because it started creating this expectation. The idea that the Fed wouldn't just worry about the real economy, but would also step in if the stock market got into trouble.
Okay.
And the sources also fault him for not pushing harder on regulating banks and all those complex new financial products, derivatives and such that were booming.
Even though warning signs were there.
Apparently so. And during this time, the sources talk about asset inflation, not consumer prices, but
Stocks, bonds, real estate prices going way up.
exactly. And the sources say Greenspan saw the stock bubble forming but didn't really act to cool it. Partly because, as the material puts it, people were saying, have your chairman stay out of our business.
Didn't want the Fed interfering with the party.
Pretty much. Which leads to this metaphor the sources use. The Greenspan put.
Explain the Greenspan put. What does that mean?
It's the idea, the belief in the market, that investors could take any risk because, in effect, they could put it to the Fed, like a safety net.
So if things went really bad, the Fed would bail out the system, or at least cushion the blow.
That was the perception, a backstop. And the sources argue this encouraged massive amounts of borrowing, debt, and risk-taking. The whole financial sector transformed.
Setting the stage perfectly for 2008.
Yep. Ben Bernanke takes over just before it hits. And the sources, pretty tough on him, saying he blew it initially,
How so?
specifically calling it his denial of the housing bubble. He called a crash a pretty unlikely possibility. The sources suggest maybe he was too focused on academic theories of efficient markets.
And missed the obvious signs on the ground.
That's the implication. And the crisis itself wasn't just about traditional banks this time.
Right. The sources call it a bank run, but on non-banks.
Exactly. Investment banks, insurance companies like AIG, places that weren't regulated in the same way.
And the Fed's response to stop it all. Huge.
Unprecedented is the word the sources use, pumping trillions of dollars in emergency loans. Bernanke promising institutions are not going to fail.
But even trillions in loans wasn't enough once rates hit zero.
Correct. So then came quantitative easing, QE.
Which is?
The Fed directly buying assets, mortgages, government debt, buying them up to inject cash directly. The sources call it a temporary nationalization of the mortgage market.
Wow. And this just hammered home that put idea again.
Louder than ever. The sources call it the Bernanke put, basically the Greenspan put, but now loud and clear.
The message being, don't worry, the government will step in.
Absolutely. There's even a quote in the material from a hedge fund manager, David Tepper, saying making money was easy because the government told you what they were going to do. They'd support asset prices.
So, okay, 2008 disaster averted, system saved. But the sources argue the underlying problems didn't go away.
No, they stress that too big to fail is still very much a thing.
And the consequence of all the bailouts, the QE, the low rates since then.
An economy that feels, according to the sources, more centrally planned than ever. Super dependent on cheap credit, sitting on a mountain of debt.
And did all that debt actually fuel strong, real economic growth?
That's the problem the sources highlight. Overall growth actually slowed. A lot of the activity was financial speculation, which they call a zero-sum game.
Just shuffling money around.
A redistribution, they call it. Helps people who own assets, sure, but doesn't necessarily create broad prosperity or real-world jobs.
Plus, the low rates crush savers, right?
Yeah, that's another point. If you have money in a savings account or money market, you earn basically nothing. Discourages saving.
Which brings us to the really big, tough question the sources pose.
The central dilemma. Can a problem created by money for nothing, all this easy credit and debt, be solved by ever more of the same?
How long can that go on? How does it end? The sources don't sound too optimistic.
No, they definitely question the sustainability. And they bring up the idea that the ultimate limit on the dollar system is just confidence.
Trust.
Right. They point to things like the S&P downgrade of U.S. debt years ago or the European debt crisis as reminders that no nation, however powerful, is too big to fail. Confidence isn't guaranteed.
And the sources argue the U.S. has basically been consuming more than it produces for a long time.
And that to get back on solid footing, the focus needs to shift. Back to real growth drivers. Education, productive investment, skilled workers.
Which means changing the incentives.
Exactly. Discouraging all that debt and consumption, encouraging saving and production instead.
But those changes, they involve some potentially tough choices, right?
That's the final thought they leave you with. It's framed as a question for you, the listener.
Yeah.
How much short-term pain for how much long-term gain?
Like maybe letting interest rates rise so saving actually pays off again, even if it slows things down initially.
That seems to be the implication.
Yeah.
Breaking these cycles might require public support for difficult, unpopular policies.
To build an economy built to last, as they put it, not one based on the empty promise of money for nothing.
Powerful stuff to consider.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, that was quite the deep dive into the Fed based on these sources. History, impact, future challenges.
Yeah, hopefully that gives you a clearer picture of this incredibly important, complex institution and some of the economic crossroads we might be facing, according to this material.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. If you found this useful or interesting, please do follow, like, share it around.
And for more discussions like this, you can follow What Bitcoin Taught Me on Twitter, X, Nostr, Bluesky, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Quite the list.
We'll catch you on the next one.
See you then.